You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. Hello and welcome to Break Time Tech Talks. Today I have with me John Willis. So welcome, John. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Just to give everyone a bit of background, could you give a high level or a quick bio of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, these days I could consider myself an author, advisor, and investor, but I've done 5 decades of different technology shifts, if you will. But today I focus on, obviously, what everybody else focuses on, AI, but I focus more on the social technical aspects. And then I'm an author. I've written numerous books. Probably the most famous is the DevOps Handbook.
Okay.
But my last book is called Rebels of Reason, which is the 100-year history of AI.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So
I haven't heard of that one. I will add that to my reading list.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
So you spent a lot of time in IT, and obviously DevOps is a huge focus for you. What are some of the lessons that you've learned, maybe especially through DevOps, that we really need to keep in mind as we're going through this new shift?
Yeah, I think there's, like I said, I've had 5 decades of shifts. I won't bore you with all of them, but I think the ones that come to mind as we're dealing with AI right now is Linux. Most people probably weren't around, but there was this big debate about the people who were moving really fast in Linux, and even some regulated businesses, and the ones that were telling me, John, this bank will never run Linux in production, right? And so there's some patterns there.
Sure.
And then we had the same thing in cloud. And then sort of DevOps was this subset of cloud, but it had all these sort of things where this is why I talk about social technical systems, in that you really have to understand the human conditions related to the technology. And that sounds obvious, but there's a lot to it, and especially at the organizational level.
Yeah.
And so I think the things that are common are these things that you can't just slam technology on people and say, go forth and do it. Or I describe this idea of these technologies have this fluorescence. A lot of people talk about winters and springs of technology shifts, particularly AI, but there's really this energy that sort of exists. It gets fluorescent. The energy stays. It then inherits. It reglazes or brightens. And the problem with that fluorescence is the blinding part, right? So you start thinking everything's new. And you start forgetting what are the parts that truly are new, and what are the parts that are actually consistent to all human technology behavior. And therein lies the real hard problem.
Right. And if I were to guess, I would say we're still probably in that fluorescence of AI a little bit.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think we're as deep into it as you can get, right? We're probably right at the peak, maybe getting to a little bit more reality checks on certain things.
Sure.
But certainly, yeah, we're smack right in the middle right now.
Okay. Are there, I guess, maybe specific things about the people or processes within an organization to help adapt to these big shifts?
Yeah,
you've seen work well?
There's always the early adopters, right? And I think early adopters are great, but you have to calibrate what your adoption looks like. And then particularly as you go up to sort of the food chain of regulatory controlled businesses, you have to be slow. You can't just race. You can't do cargo culting of what everybody else is doing. This knee-jerk reaction is like, we're behind. Who are you behind? I don't know. We're behind, right? And like what I'm trying to work with the clients, so listen to me. So I'm an independent, and these days I'm semi-retired, but I do work when the chief of staff or CAO calls me or has heard my presentation. And I come in and I don't even take the work unless they're willing to listen to this idea of like, calm down. If people ask me, if their first question is, what would you recommend as your 30, 60, 90-day plan? I'm like, don't have one. So you have to learn how to learn. And this is consistent with every technology shift I've seen. I'm not smart. I've just been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think learning to learn, and one of the things I've created is the idea of ideation hackathons.
Okay.
The developers are that's a whole sort of animal that I don't really focus on, although I have a lot of experience, obviously DevOps and all that stuff. But my concern is that the organization wants to take all the executive assistants in the finance department, and the supply chain, and in marketing, and they want to just throw them right into the middle of the ocean with AI. And I think there's an organizational calibration that you have to learn how to learn. And so I think the Ideation Hackathon is a great way to figure out how are these groups going to work together, how are they going to work within the organization. People ask me, well, what tools are you going to use? None. Well, what do you mean no tools? Why aren't you just giving them, Codex, or why don't you give them Claude, or why don't you give them a Clobot? I'm like, because that's the worst possible thing you can do. Imagine having a couple hundred executive assistants all individually choosing the technical debt nightmare, and I'm not even getting into the risk problem.
Right.
So slow down. Learn how to ideate in this new world. Learn as an organization handoffs. And I've done these. They're brilliant. You let those teams come up with the ideas, figure out what kind of things actually do make sense with AI, what things don't. Because that's the other problem. If you just hand somebody and said, go automate everything, they're going to automate everything.
Yeah.
Right?
That's actually a fair point too, because a lot of times outside of the developer space, we don't think about how different adopting that technology looks like for somebody who's non-technical. How do they know the guardrails? How do they know what to trust and what not to? How do they know how to guide the AI tools into the results and the answers they're looking for?
Yeah, now a great example, like in an ideation hackathon I did last year for a candy bar company, this one team had a brilliant idea, and they didn't even understand the consequences of data provenance. Right? So again, you don't want to find that out later.
Right. Yeah, that's a big enough concern. You need to know ahead of time.
You want to have an advisement during the ideation factor. Here's what we're going to do. Oh, well, we're going to have to rethink that data right there. And we can spend an hour on what can happen with wrong data.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In inference. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Is there a big disconnect between maybe leadership in teams, or maybe just even within teams and departments then?
Yeah, this is across the board. There's so many. I'm pro AI, right? So the one thing I always, when I'm presenting or something, I want to say, let me get this clear. I think this is phenomenal. When you think about pre-GPS for getting anywhere.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. There'll be a point where I'm like, I can't imagine not having these tools.
Right.
Right, as a companion. And again, I understand that it is inference, is probability, but just don't eliminate critical thinking.
Right.
But back to the fluorescence, right? Getting blinded, and they're throwing out all this sort of logic. I can go through a whole list, but audit, I'm ridiculously concerned about what audit's going to look at. And worse, I go to a lot of conferences and I talk to people, really smart people, giving presentations about how what we're doing AI here. And I ask them simple questions about evidence or evaluations, or sort of this notion of LM as a judge, or how you're going to manage, like there's a term called human on the loop, right, instead of human in the loop, right? How are you going to deal with agentics? Because there's a whole nother level of containment, kill switches. It's like a deer in the headlight discussions. Right, so I think this push to go fast, and everybody has to catch up, and what is our competitor doing, and we can't lose out. Risk, I didn't go to Black Hat this year, but a friend of mine just got back and said cyber is completely broken, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, risk is completely broken.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody's trying to overlay the old cyber and risk patterns on this new, completely different. It's like von Neumann to quantum, right? Von Neumann architecture quantum. It is like you can't think the same.
Right.
And I see people writing governance manifestos for AI, and it's like, okay, you just added the word AI into the list.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're still trying to figure out how to switch that mental model. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, where everybody feels behind, no matter how fast or how far they might be moving. They just feel behind everything else. And so therefore, I think some of this stuff kind of falls to the wayside because they're just trying to keep up or stay ahead of the game.
The other thing, if I want to be writing a little bit more about where we are in this fluorescence, we're at a point now I think you can honestly go back and compare what happened in the early days of the cloud. And in the early days of the cloud, everybody raced to put things on the cloud.
Yeah.
And then there was this pullback, right, for obvious reasons. Oh, what do you mean? That probably shouldn't have been in the cloud. You can't put that in the cloud. You could get sued. And I think we're going to see that sort of reactive process here hopefully happening. I think the real thing is when internal auditing catches up.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to cloud. Internal auditing, like, why is that data in a public cloud? How did that get there or got exposed? And so we're going to have to learn how to pull back. Cloud, it was mostly about data. AI inference, there's a lot about data, but there's sort of new risks. Cloud was, could the service or data running on the cloud be breached?
Mm-hmm.
Or were you protecting regulatory data? Now we got very the same, but now we got the question of what goes into a public model.
Yep.
And what's being kept, what's not kept. These are opaque systems that we have
Right.
no idea. Yeah.
It's still a bit of a black box.
That's right. It is a black box. No matter what they tell you, it is a black box. The public ones, for sure.
Do you think this is more of a people or a process type of function, or maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, the quick answer is both, of course. But there's another point I was driving on that last conversation, which was like the one thing we learned in the cloud, which was we had to figure out in the simplest form was green, yellow, red, or blue applications.
Okay.
It was mostly around data classification, but it was a service classification. And so I'm suggesting for a large corporation, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't do nothing or don't do everything.
Right.
Start thinking about services and learn how to learn on the low-hanging fruit. So go as fast as possible. Have pilots, have groups that are investing in trying out the different providers. Try open source ones. Try the OpenWeight. Try the Gemini. The family from Google is very powerful, or OpenAI. And spread your wings. You don't have to lock in right now. The game is changing so fast.
Yeah.
So, but figure out that spectrum. That's part of the take a deep breath. Go to the coffee machine, get a really good cup of coffee, smell it, taste it, then sit down and start thinking about what you got. This I actually tell when a chief of staff calls me and they're like, "Oh, John, things are going crazy." I want you to calm down. I want you to go to the coffee machine. I've actually said this. I want you to call me back in about 10 minutes. Or go down to the local barista, 20 minutes, and call me back.
Yeah.
So, and it really is that simple.
Okay. I've mentioned on the podcast how the AI systems especially can be sensitive to configuration or setting changes. A new model comes out, something changes on a language version or a library version somewhere, and that causes kind of upset within your application. And of course, because these things release so quickly, all technologies really now, then you feel like you're in a constant state of breaking. How should people and teams and processes maybe start thinking about that constant state of moving fast and breaking things, but on a large scale now?
Yeah, this is a hard problem, right? This is probably the hardest problem there is right now. Because I think you could tier this in a number of ways. One is the buy versus build conversation.
Okay.
Right, which is a really interesting conversation going on in large corporations. And you can imagine it has lots of flavors, some wrong, some good. Some of the ones is I've got, I have 4,000 developers. I don't want to lay them off because they're integral to the business. What can I do with them? Could I replace an institutional product? I could set a reduction, like I could actually get productive and remove $5 million, $10 million. But then the question is, what is the technology? What is the complete system that you've got? So that's a whole conversation itself. I think there's this other idea, and this one I kind of get, but again, I worry about the highly regulated businesses, the banks, the healthcare, the ones where high consequence environments.
Yep.
Is this idea that the code is the new assembler. And I get it, but that's an all-in. And in that world, I'm just hearing really smart people and friends of mine who literally are like top Java architects for banks say things like code is the new assembly, meaning just like we didn't care. I started my career as an assembly programmer. Okay. I don't write anything in assembler today, right?
Right.
Maybe there's a world where, and I'm not trying to get anybody riled up now, but maybe there's a world where you don't ever write code. And I'm seeing it, a lot of people right now talk about no code review in 6 months, haven't written code. And in that world, still going to have to deal with your question, but maybe it's less because it's dynamic and it's changing. And then
Okay.
I think the third tier answer to this question is back to understanding the service that you're dealing with and how sensitive it is to model changes, in particularly inference and probability.
Okay.
Because that's the biggest problem, right? Is that I could have an application working on Opus 4 out of whatever
Yeah.
right now, perfect, and then I upgrade the model and it just completely gets different answers.
Right.
To a degree, maybe it's 3% different, maybe it's 4% different, but again, depending what the actual delivery mechanism is, could kill people, right?
Yeah. Sure.
So here's another thing I like about my career is we've learned to borrow ideas from other spaces. So in the DevOps world, we looked at resilience, and people look at critical safety
Okay.
and stuff like airplane crashes and patients dying in a hospital due to some form of procedural problem.
Right.
And there's great wealth of information there to learn from. But one is something called the Ito principle, which is the efficiency-thoroughness trade-off.
Okay.
And so then thinking that way about maybe I should use open weights and open source, there's going to be a cost of doing that versus the big provider that gives me all this stuff and is better at inference.
Okay.
And I'm going to have to maintain the models, but at least I can control those models and maintenance. There's this sort of balance that you have to figure out. And this is probably one of the harder problems right now that I think organizations, particularly regulated industries, are facing.
Okay. So perhaps, especially for very high criticality use cases and industries and businesses, looking at things that they have more, I don't want to say necessarily control, but at least more fine-tuning capabilities.
Yeah, think about the answer to the question, or in agentic process that you've given away some level of human control, what are the consequences of the degree of a wrong answer? That could be a cost, that could be a human experience, right? That's where you have to decide the cost of maintaining and building on top of open or open weight models and supporting them yourself
Yeah.
and getting probably lower efficacy but more throughput or thoroughness, right?
Yeah.
Versus what is the risk of using a very powerful public model. I think the good news too is I just read the other day, and again, I just saw this in my queue to follow up on it, but Google was probably 3 in a 5-horse race on models, but they do have this hybridity where you can run their public and private Gemini.
Oh, that's nice.
But up until recently, I'm almost certain OpenAI does not have that hybridity, and Claude did not. But I just saw something the other day that implied that they might be allowing some customers to run their own sort of private version. And again, that's all I know about it. But that is very encouraging because now you can get the best of all worlds.
More things to test.
Well, you can pin a very powerful model. You shouldn't have got me on a podcast. I always go over.
No
But
worries.
the cloud thing, the metaphor we would use is, should you build your own electricity creating grid or use a public service, right? And that would be the argument for why you might want to use cloud. Should you build your own infrastructure, maintain your infrastructure when you get all this as a utility?
Right.
And we're in that same question now about inference.
Right.
What is the cost of managing and building and maintaining your own open weight models that can keep up? And the open weight models are pretty powerful. I've said it multiple times. It depends on what the service you're trying to do.
Sure.
Right. So.
Yep. The age-old, development answer is it depends.
It depends. Absolutely. More now than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Well, John, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and talking about your experience and the things you've learned through DevOps and how that can be applied now throughout the AI era.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me.
My other question is for resources. I know you mentioned your book as well. I'll link to that. And if there's anything else you want to share or things coming up.
Yeah, I got Author Portal. My Author Portal has all my books.
Great.
So my LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me. I do strategy advisement for very select customers, and I always start with the innovation hackathons is I think the best way to get started for an organization.
Perfect.
But I'll get you all those links. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Bye.